and many dreams and many colors. Many people in Ipoh do not know who the Islamic Renaissance Front is yet. For short form, I refer to them as the IRF. The IRF is a group of progressive Muslim professionals who are doing great work in engendering modern thinking in their own community and promoting better understanding of Islam amongst Malaysians. The most important work to date has been to articulate their religion as one which is inclusive, compassionate, and just. Promote acceptance of multiculturalism and affirm the notion that Malaysia is a secular state. This public policy lecture will help all of us gain a better understanding of the IRF. Personally, I think that it is very important to support Muslim groups that speak the language of modernity and whose essence is truth-seeking and practical application of religious precepts that in an inclusive and just manner. So, overcoming my own previous aversion as a small business owner to stray too deep into public spaces that are best left to politicians to occupy, I want to tell you, my friends, what is in my heart. I think the Islamic Renaissance Front deserves our support. In my view, the success of the IRF will contribute to a better Malaysia, and it deserves the support of Malaysians. Hence, I move to bring them to Ipoh for their maiden visit to this fair city of ours to talk about the future of Malaysia. This is a great opportunity to refresh our understanding of the possibilities for the future. It is a great opportunity for the IRF to meet the people of Ipoh. This afternoon's lecture will be delivered by Dr. Ahmad Farouk Musa and Saudara Ahmad Fuad Rahmat of the IRF. They are both highly educated professionals, and you would have had the opportunity to read their biodata, which was enclosed with the invitation that was sent to you earlier on. So I will not go through that again. The lecture today is entitled The Future of Malaysia. It will be delivered jointly by Dr. Farouk and Fuad in two parts. Dr. Farouk will lead with the IRF's political vision of what Malaysia can be and should be. And in part two, Fuad will then spell out the economic underpinnings of the Malaysia described by Dr. Farouk in part one. We will then have a short break for coffee and tea, and this will be followed by Q&A. Without further ado, I invite Dr. Ahmad Farouk Musa to start the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Harold, for your kind words. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is my first visit to Ipoh. Actually, I'm from Penang, and I see KL. Ipoh is actually in between, but I haven't had the time to visit Ipoh, and this is my first time in Ipoh actually. And as Harold mentioned just now, I'll be talking about the future of Malaysia on the political aspect of it. I think we are basically at the junction where we want to go. What is the direction that we want to choose? Either it is a progressive direction or a retrogressive direction. I will try and explain to you what is the situation right now and what are the possibilities that we may have in our hands. Right? First of all, I'll start this lecture by quoting from Malcolm X, who said, "The future belongs to those who prepare for it today." So if we prepare for it, then we'll be able to face the future better. And there are a lot of pressing issues nowadays, a lot of things, and I believe that most of you are well versed about the recent developments in the political situation in Malaysia. But there are a few developments that I think that are pertinent for me to mention to you. And most of all is the discourse about what they call as Islamic state and secular state. I was basically disturbed when there's the current law minister Nazri mentioned in the parliament recently that Malaysia is basically an Islamic state, because it was mentioned in Article 3 that Islam is the religion of the Federation, and it was the word secular was never mentioned in the Constitution. Now I wonder, if that is the case, then are we practicing democracy? Because the word democracy is never mentioned in the Constitution as well. So you cannot argue based on that. I'm going to go in depth about why we are a secular state, and we must maintain a secular nature of our state, and it's very important for that. And the second thing that basically disturbs me is the currently concluded past Muktamar General Assembly in Kota Baru. Even though the president tried to steer away from mentioning hudud and Islamic State, but you have probably read or heard about the intonation and subjects being discussed, and basically it centers around hudud and around the ultimate aim of establishing an Islamic State. So finally, the president himself concluded in his speech saying that PAS has never strayed away from its main objective. He did not say Islamic State, but what was the main objective? It can be seen in the PAS constitution itself that the aim is to establish an Islamic State. So, no matter how much they talk about what they call negara kebajikan or nation of care and opportunity, term being popularized by Dr. Zul, the Erdoganist in past. But we see that nobody talks about a welfare state. Nobody talks about negara kebajikan, right? Everybody, especially from the ulama wing and the youth wings, they will talk about hudud and about establishing an Islamic state. Ultimately, they even went further to say that we want the president to be the prime minister, the next prime minister of Malaysia. They did not even win a single seat yet. They have that intention in their mind. Okay? So that is very important. Understand? Because nothing was mentioned in Buku Jingga, right? Everybody is familiar about Buku Jingga. Nothing was mentioned in Buku Jingga about Islamic State or about hudud. And basically, the Pakatan, all the parties should abide by Buku Jingga. So nobody can talk, something out of Buku Jingga itself, because we're talking about something basically your ulterior motive on what is your idea about your political future, basically. So I'll just give a little bit of background about this landmark case of Cik Omar bin Cik Sof versus public prosecutor. There's a lawyer over here, a human rights lawyer. It was mentioned in the Malaysian Law Journal, 1988. I will go into detail about this case, but this case was basically a landmark case where the Supreme Court held that laws in Malaysia do not have to conform to the Islamic principles, and confirmed that Malaysia is a secular state. I think Karpal Singh had mentioned about this case many times. Probably, I wasn't too sure whether you're aware of it or not. The case of Cik Omar Cik Sof was basically a Muslim drug trafficker who was caught and was facing a mandatory life sentence. So, I think his attorney, Ramdas Pikamdas, if I'm not mistaken, argued that since Islam is the religion of the Federation, laws passed by Parliament must be imbued with Islamic principles, and that death penalty was void because it was not according to Islamic law. Right? Islamic law, you have qisas and qisas basically to kill 100%, but because of murder and things like that, but not because of drug trafficking. So they argued that because Islam is the law of the Federation, Islam is the religion of the Federation, so whatever the verdict at that time should be considered void, right? Because it was against the constitution. The then Lord President in the landmark ruling said, this was Tun Sri Abbas, he said, we have to set aside our personal feelings because the law in this country is still what it is today, a secular law, where morality not accepted by the law is not enjoying the status of the law. Our constitution provides in Article 4 that the constitution is the highest law of the land, whereas in an Islamic state, it would place the Quran as the highest authority. The validity of laws, therefore, must be measured upon the yardstick of the constitution and not Islamic principles, thus making the constitution a secular one, right? Because we say that the highest law in the land is the constitution. It's not the Quran or the Sunnah. So now we are facing with the problem, could we lose this secular status? Yes, we could. But must go through a series of amendments of the constitution that will require 2/3 majority agreement in both houses of parliament and the agreement of the Conference of Rulers and the states of Sabah and Sarawak. Now the issue is that what will happen in the next general election? Look, if PAS were to win the next general election and they form the bulk of the coalition, right? No matter whether they form the government or not, they have the power to impose their view. And would the Malay Muslim parliamentarians be strong enough to say, no, we want to stay as a secular state and we will not amend the constitution? Mind you, the issue now is that they will always play with laws of God. You know, this is basically we have to abide because we're Muslims, you cannot say no. We have to basically follow whatever is being said in the Quran. So we will have no choice. So in that way, you know, they're trying to, they could influence the other parliamentarians, especially the Malay Muslim parliamentarians, to support their agenda. So what is the political future of this country? I would say that, you know, there are two main things that we have to understand. The first is the UMNO's agenda of Islamization to win the Malay Muslim voters. And the second is the past relentless pursuit of an Islamic state agenda. So I would focus my talk on these two aspects basically. First is the UMNO agenda, the second is the past agenda. So like Harold said, that it's very important for this multiracial crowd to understand, because you know we are from KL, then this kind of discourse is quite frequent over there, but I'm not too sure about the situation over here. So what I would say, like for UMNO's agenda, UMNO, despite being a secular nationalist party, it has always been trying to out-Islamize PAS, right? And no stone will be left unturned in the pursuit to redefine the meaning and essence of Islam itself. UMNO articulated its policy of gradual Islamization as a mean to meet the electoral challenge of PAS, but by doing so inadvertently made Islam an even more contentious political concept, with profound implications for the future shape of Malaysia politics. What has happened in Malaysia in the last few years is that Islam has been dynamically propelled to the center stage of politics. It has become a medium for Malay politics, and political demands for greater Islamic purity have multiplied despite the change in the political climate after the March 2008 general election. Now, they started their project with what is known as penerapan nilai-nilai Islam, infusion of Islamic values, a policy guideline for the incorporation of Islamic ethics in government. This was during Mahathir's era itself, right? Though it did not formally constitute an Islamic state, it was considered the most purposeful expression of Islamization project that UMNO had ever made. And then we had this fiasco of the issue of whipping of Muslim women for illicit sex. and they wanted to cane for alcohol consumption, women for alcohol consumption as well. Though it contradicts the civil law where women are not punishable by caning under section 289 of the Criminal Procedure Code, it's a clear manifestation of UMNO as a ruling party in government trying to out-Islamize past. They're showing to the people, trying to show to the people that they are more Islamic than past. Similarly, UMNO tried to portray itself as a champion, as championing Islamic cause and seizing the role as custodian of Islam in the Allah issue. Right? It tries its best to promote the image of an exemplary Muslim party that defended the sanctity of the word Allah from being used by Christians. And this was a real fiasco a few years ago. Right? They were saying that, only Malays, Muslims can monopolize the word Allah. Nobody else can use the word Allah. So, similarly, they tried to prevent this Bible in Malay being distributed in Borneo, for example, right? Because it contains the word Allah. So, they say that, you cannot disseminate this Bible in Malay. In trying to do so, they're trying to curtail the understanding of Muslims from understanding other religions. They want people to understand Islam, but they don't want to understand other people's religion. So there is no reciprocity. Right? There is no reciprocity at all. And they forgot that the first translator for this Malay Bible was none other than Munshi Abdullah, a great literary figure. Right? They forgot about that. Did Munshi Abdullah tend to become Christian because he translated the Bible into Malay? No. Right? It's ridiculous. Why can't we understand the words of God, of other religion? For people who could not understand the English language. And Bible initially wasn't in English as well. It was in Aramaic, if I'm not mistaken, right? Yeah. Alright. Not contented with the 5 speeches, demonstrations were held in the relentless effort to stir up Muslim sentiments. It could be surmised that the arson attack which damaged at least 10 places of worship, mostly Christian churches, were due to incitement by a few politicians, the mainstream Malay media, and a few organizations linked directly or indirectly to the ruling party UMNO. So you have heard about Perkasa, Pembela, and a few other groups, or what I call them as GOGOs, government-oriented, government-affiliated NGOs. Now let's go down to the memory lane. After the time, just now we discussed about Mahathir, and then second we discussed about what happened during Abdullah Badawi's time, right? So on 31st of October 2003, Dr. Mahathir was succeeded by Badawi, Tun Abdullah Ahmad Badawi. For all intents and purposes, Islam was officially crystallized as bedrock of Abdullah administration via his proclamation of the fundamental principles of Islam Hadari, or civilizational Islam. I don't know whether you remember or not this Islam Hadari, but it was, widely promoted during Abdullah Badawi's time. Projection of Islam Hadari as nation's development strategy for the future briefly put Islamists on the defensive. At that time, past was taken aback, right? Judging from the initial enthusiasm, Islamists were in real danger of losing moral ground to UMNO. As an extension of UMNO's long-standing battle with past, Islam Hadari will continue to was used to counter past Islam. Rather than being a civilizational grand design as intended, Islam Hadari was construed as a political project to outwit Islamists by hijacking a vital component of their agenda. However, we have seen that non-Muslims were left in the dark as to the theoretical understanding of what this Islam Hadari is all about. They became embroiled in legal disputes with the Islamic authorities over conversion issues and temple demolitions. And not only that, Muslims were not spared as well. those who subscribe to unorthodox belief like Shiite were persecuted on theological grounds in spite of the fact that this particular school of thought had existed for centuries alongside the Sunni. And until today, just 2 days ago, there was a raid at two of Shiites' houses in UK Perdana and in Gombak, right? 100 enforcement officers, and that was just like a week ago. Malaysia signed a ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. It seems that this country doesn't understand human rights. So there's only one version of Islam. I always say to people, in Malaysia there's only one version of Islam. Islam of Jakib. Right? No other version of Islam. You cannot have any other versions. That's why they took an action against former Mufti of Perlis, Dr. Asri. Yeah, Jais apprehended him in Nampang a few years ago. Yeah, I issued a press statement against that. But there's only one version of Islam. It must be endorsed. Jakim endorsed halal. This is like halal for Islam as well, right? You cannot practice any other Islam than the one endorsed by Jakim. But what is more worrying, I don't know whether you are aware because you are in Ipoh. I'm not trying to belittle your knowledge, your understanding of political situation, but it seems that I don't know how much exposure you have about this aspect of what we call as literal Islam. Have you heard of it? Literal Islam? Have you heard of Salafis or Wahhabis? Yeah, basically they are literal Islams, okay? So they are the literalists. So they tend to interpret text literally. Alright? So they say that they are the safe sect. There's only one safe sect because they interpreted literally when the Prophet said that the Jews will be divided into 72 sects. The Christians, the Jews 71. The Christians 72 sects. The Muslims 73. Only one will be saved. That is their sect. These Wahhabis, they advocated or they tried to advocate this the revival of pristine Islamic society, akin to the 7th century Medina, and the establishment of Islamic states based on Sharia law. Any other form of constitutions or political systems are dismissed as an Islamic manifestations of Western neo-colonialism. So for the literalists, the act of being faithful to the Prophet, his companions, and the Salaf or the pious predecessors, the Sahabas, the companions of the Prophet, essentially consists in imitating their behavior and simply trying to reproduce their historical dated achievement. Confusion exists. This is their confusion between principles and models, between a rule and its form. And this led to exceedingly rigid and particularly exclusive reductions. For example, they want to replicate the state of Medina in the 21st century, right? So they don't understand about multi-party politics or democracy or or whatever aspects of economy that we have, or human rights, or transparency, integrity. They don't understand all that. You just replicate whatever is during the Prophet's time to the 21st century. It's as simple as that. And it attracts a lot of young people. Why? It's based on its simplicity. I always say they work on this black and white agenda. I said, everything you can see between black and white. If it's not black, it's white. It's as simple as that. So to the juvenile minds, to young people, they get attracted. They can easily get attracted because it's so simple, so easy. So this one, the Prophet did not do this, so what should we do? So they try to imitate. So you see people with long beards, for example, and with what do you call? Very their pants, will be above the above the ankle. Have you seen people like that? So these are typical Salafis or Wahhabis. they're wearing their pants very high up above the ankle, up the shin, to level of the shin. Yeah, turban sometimes, occasionally. Occasionally they wear just like this, the Saudi type of cloth, Yeah. But that's the typical type of Salafis in Malaysia. And what the worrying trend about these Salafis is that, first of all, they denounce democracy. Alright? So they denounce democracy. For them, democracy is kufr, is un-Islamic, is an infidel system. Right? Once there was a forum at the Islamic International University, and I was invited as panelist, apart from Dr. Zulkifli Ahmad from PAS and the head of the Salafi. Nowadays, they even join the government, right, and form a wing called the Ulama Muda UMNO, right, Ilmu, they call themselves. And they're quite influential, alright. And he came up with the idea that democracy is totally against Islam. It is similar to eating pork, right? You can only use it when necessary. Your ultimate aim is something else. So when the time comes, you can leave it and you can take something else, right? So it's just what you call a stopgap, right? Yeah. A stepping stone to reach something else. Yeah. Yes, emergency. It's an emergency. And for example, when this Arab Spring, when the Egyptian revolution was going on, they issued a verdict saying that it was haram to participate in the protest, right? But when the Egyptian managed to overthrow Mubarak, they formed a party, An-Nur, and they joined the election, right? They participated in the election, and they formed, I think they had managed to infiltrate into the, what they call the parliament, the parliament of Egypt country, right? And this, to me, their aim, their participation is basically, they participate in democracy to destroy democracy, right? So you have seen a lot of upheavals in Egypt, for example, between the what do you call the Christian Mennonites? Coptics. Between the Coptics and the Muslims, basically they are the Salafis who are creating all these havocs over there. Secondly, they believe that a corrupt and unjust ruler must be obeyed as long as he is a Muslim and he performs prayer. So that's why the current government is trying to, they trying to give whatever they want, because basically they are the ulama version, the religious faction that could counter PAS, right? Because PAS basically is a party comprises of mainly, Islamic scholars. So they need Islamic scholars, not like Harusani or what they call the traditionalists, but these are what they call modernist type of scholars. So they like them. So the government used them to say that the authority of the government is valid, and any forms of demonstrations or any form is unacceptable. So they label people in Bersih, for example, like I'm a steering committee member of Bersih, right, as Khawarij. Khawarij is very divine sect of Islam that killed the fourth caliph during a time of in Islamic history. Right, so it's a aggressive sect, right? So they're trying to portray anybody that participate in democracy, like they don't understand that like we are living in democracy, and we have in our constitution, right? We can assemble peacefully, right? So of course now we have the right to challenge the Peaceful Assembly Act when they when they put us on trial for what they asked us to pay 122,000 or whatever. Yeah, so we're trying to challenge them in court and saying that it's against the Constitution itself. Yeah? I think it's Article 10, right? Yeah, Article 10 of the Constitution. And another thing is that they are very, very intolerant, even to the mildest form of entertainment, such as music. So this morning, I read on Guardian, for example. On Guardian, it says that the Salafis, they attack the musicians in Mali. You know where Mali is? It's a North African country just south of Libya, right? Timbuktu is in Mali actually. So we like to say Timbuktu, but it's in Mali. So they attack and burn all the musical instruments, and they have these musical instruments, what is known as kora, is a type of guitar, but a special type of guitar. And you know that for Mali, music is akin to mineral wealth. Mali the musician has won so many awards at the international arena for the music. So just go back and try and key in YouTube for this kora, right? Mali music, and you see how beautiful it is. Right? And they were against that, right? And we have to anticipate the same thing to happen over here if they come to power. Understand? If they manage to infiltrate the current government and be more dominant, then this is what we're going to get. So, if we analyze, we will say that UMNO has basically moved from being a moderate Muslim party to a very radical party because of especially these Salafis, okay? And what were once considered to be an extreme demands by PAS now in fact constitute government policy. This analysis was made even by a foreign affairs journalist, right? Foreign Affairs, the journal, you have seen probably Foreign Affairs. It was made by the Foreign Affairs journalist himself. Now let's go to the second agenda, the PAS agenda. Now the longest running controversies that PAS has gotten itself into is the question of an Islamic state and its stated aim of implementing hudud punishments should it ever come to power in the country. Hudud issue has been one of the most effective discursive and analytical tools that PAS has had in its formidable arsenal. Due to the pivotal status that Sharia occupies in the economy of Islamic theological legal discourse, it has been elevated to the status of the holy grail of many an Islamist movement. Why is it so appealing? Then we have to look at the corresponding failure of the counterpart, the civil legal system. This shift actually took place at a time when we, Malaysians, we were exposed to a string of major corporate and political scandals. Could not be a simple coincidence as such as the scandals grew in scale as well as number. The public confidence in the civil legal system was tested. And because of that, PAS Hudud agenda is believed that the harsher the punishment is, it could curtail the corruption and and misdemeanor by the ruling government. So that is the reason being. People say that because of Hudud law, then you can reduce the crime rate. But studies have shown that this is not true. You just go through the internet and find out a lot of studies. And one of the most recent study was a study conducted by Georgetown University professors, Washington University professors, about how Islamic are Islamic countries. So you will see that Islamic countries were basically at the lower part of the scale based on the criteria that they have looked into, right? And you will see that the most Islamic country based on Islamicity index, what they call as Islamicity index, is none other than New Zealand. So people ask me, what is the example of Islamic country? I would say New Zealand. That was what I said in UIA when they asked me that question. It was in Saudi Arabia, right? So you have to understand about it, right? So you have to look at the parameters that they use to look at, how do you consider it to be Islamic, right? Now, let's move to another agenda, that is the Arab Spring. We all know that this Wazizi, who burned himself, right, was basically the spark that managed to, how to give impetus to this to Arab Spring throughout the whole of Middle Eastern and North Africa region, and it started in Tunisia itself. But the Tunisia after Zainal Abidin bin Ali was being overthrown, Rashid Ghannouchi, who was in exile in London, came back. So he was the leader of Ennahda. Ennahda is party of the Renaissance party. Right, the Renaissance is the name in Arabic is Ennahda, but not similar, of course, they are not similar. But his aim was not to establish an Islamic state. Right? He was, in his speech, he was very certain that he wants to maintain Tunisia as a secular state. He said that, do not be scared, we are not going to implement hudud, we are not going to ban bikinis from our beaches. You know, like a lot of Europeans come to Tunisian beaches. Right? But what happened, for example, in Kelantan? The first thing that they would do was to curtail how women should wear, or should wear this, should wear that. Even in posters, I was told that posters with Era Vazira on it, they put a tudung on it. What ridiculous is that, isn't it? So these are the things. And even recently, like the hairdresser salon, right? You heard about it. There's so many things that, and a few months ago, a few ladies, Muslim ladies, who had to kind of, they had to kind of wore either short sleeves because they work in a restaurant and they had to wash dishes. Well, they don't want to wet their long sleeves, right? And they were being, called by the MPKB and fined by the MPKB. So these are the things that you have to, think about. What will happen to this country? No music, no concerts, no movies. There's nothing. No short sleeves. And Rashid Ghannouchi, he rejected categorically the concept of Islamic Caliphate, right, in favor of parliamentary democracy. And his Ennahda party is committed to social justice, multi-party democracy, and most importantly, religious pluralism. And that is what we want right now in Malaysia. They strive to achieve social justice, dignity, and a form of democratic governments that can protect citizens' fundamental rights. So what does our future hold? At the heart of the apparent conflict between the Islamic and democratic traditions, in a static and stagnant approach to understanding Islamic law, with the marginalization of Islamic juristic leaning and restriction of public debate on Islamic law by the state and the traditionalist jurists allied with it, a literalist approach has become rampant in many Muslim societies. And under such climate, the most rigid and literalist interpretations of Islamic sources prevail, while enlightened and reformist views are suppressed and marginalized. And the only way forward to resolve such conflict is to allow a space for intellectual discourse and to respect religious rights and freedom of expression. Islam should be seen to play a role as guarantor of human dignity through action programs to ensure the physical safety of individual citizens, their right to protect their family, the safety of their property, fairness in their profession, and participation in civil society. Lastly, all citizens, no less than non-believers, believers and no less than non-believers, have the same basic reason to embrace the right to religious freedom. This is very important because, as you have heard about the Pharaoh recently, this Nurul Izzah, when she quoted, La ikrah fi din, there shall be no coercion in matters of faith, which means that you should not or could not coerce people to embrace Islam as much as you cannot prevent people who don't believe anymore in the faith to leave Islam to be something as similar to promoting apostasy. This is wrong. What she was trying to say was basically freedom of religion, right? And is embodied in our constitutional in our constitution. So what's the problem with that? So we have to understand about this matter. And the ruling government is not to be trusted as an arbiter of religious truth. Moreover, the coercive imposition of religious uniformity is more likely to corrode than nurture the strength of a democracy. With that, I thank you.
It's always encouraging to be invited to different places to share our views, especially to meet our supporters, you know, who noticed our work in the media, especially given that the things we say and do are always met with criticisms. So one day we got an email from Mr. Harold asking to meet with us to just introduce ourselves to each other and see how we can work together. And this is why we are here today, just so that we can share our perspectives and hopefully find commonalities and who knows, even one day cooperate on more extensive and bigger things. So today I think it's a good first step, just to introduce ourselves to one another. I was asked to say a few things about the economy. Now, first things first, I just want to let you know that I'm not an economist. I'm just a Malaysian citizen who is concerned about the state of Malaysia's economy. And given that a key commitment of IRF is to establish or to work towards promoting a more inclusive, democratic and just Malaysia, we believe that the economic agenda should be as important as the widening of democratic spaces and establishing a more comprehensive commitment to human rights. So we can always talk about free and fair elections, we can always talk about freedom of conscience, but ultimately the economy must be a part of the agenda as well. So just to give a rough idea of what's at stake here, I'm going to share some numbers that I aggregated just from reading around that I think provides some sense of how serious it is the economy should be taken. Right? So I will talk about three things. The first is the situation of poverty in Malaysia. Second is income inequality. And the third is a social inclusion act, which several members of civil society in Malaysia is trying to push to bring a more ground-up approach to understanding poverty rather than one that is the current one that we have right now, which I'll talk about as well. So, first things first, poverty in Malaysia. Let's look at the general numbers. I think this is something familiar to all of us, that since the NEP, the story that we are told, since 1970 after the May 13 riots, the state seized a great deal of the country's resources and assets and redistributed it under the rubric of the NEP. And since then, we're told that the incidence of poverty, the percentage, has dramatically lessened, right, from 49.3% in 1970 to 3.8% in 2009. Right. The number of poor households, and households can range from 4 to 5 persons, has also apparently been reduced in that process. Now we are left with 6 million 24,500 households in the the total is 6 million, but the number of households which are locked in poverty is 249,294. So this is just the general picture. Getting more specific, what we find are the breakdowns in the different regions, right? So Sabah surprisingly has the highest rate of poverty at 19.2% of its population. Sarawak, at least official numbers, is 5.3%, but this is also being contested by many civil society NGOs. They argue that it's much more than that. Peninsula, the official numbers has it, is 2.0%. Right? Malaysia in total, as we discussed just now, is 3.8%. Right? In Peninsula, the highest is in Perlis, 6%. 6% of Perlis' population. How do they determine this? Right? So we see the poverty percentages, but what does this actually mean? To determine this, the government established a poverty line income. That means the most minimum standard at which no citizen should fall beneath. Right? So in Peninsula, the income for the PLI is 763 ringgit. Right? Sarawak 912, and Sabah, because things are more expensive there, is 1,048. Right? And that translates to, look at the second column, how much that would be broken down to each person in the household. Right? So daily income is 25. A person should be, to be considered poor, to have reached 580 or less. Okay? Now, why is this worrying? Just think of the things that you would need to run a functioning household, right? Food, clothing, rent, furniture, health, transport, communication, education, recreation. All of that is supposed to be served by an income of 763 in Peninsula, 912 in Sarawak, and 1,048 in Sabah. Right? So you can see there are two questions here. One, what exactly is the 763 per household supposed to tell us? Right? Is it saying that it is only an emergency point as you reach that point? Right? What is the level of acceptability that our bureaucrats thought about when they came out with these numbers? We'll talk about that more soon, but just something to just jog your thinking as we discuss this. So, how would it look like if we change it a little bit further, right? So, say the current average PLI is 800 ringgit, total number of poor households 250,000, and that brings you 3.8% of the population. But what if we change it to 1,000 ringgit? We'll see that 460,000 Malaysians will fall under that category, and the rate of poverty will increase 7.4. Right? But about 1,500, the number increases to 21.6%. Right? Now think about it, 1,500 ringgit a month, is that really enough to cover the things, the necessities that were listed in the previous slide? Right? How much better off are we, even close to double the poverty line income? How much better off are we to afford those things comfortably? Right? So when you put it into perspective, when you enlarge the numbers, you realize that perhaps the poverty line income set by the establishment, by the government, does not really capture the reality of what it means to live as a poor person in Malaysia. Right? Now the question of what makes a definition of poverty acceptable in the first place has to be raised. Right? So let's move it further to 2,000 ringgit. You'll see 2.1 million Malaysians implicated. Right? 33.5% of the total households. Right? Now, this is just income. Right? does not take into account consumption. How much you actually end up spending. That's one. It does not take into account debt. Right? And in Malaysia, we know that there are two types of debt. The debt that's registered, right, through the banks, insurance companies, so on and so forth, and the kind of debt you get from public ads that are hung on trees, underneath bridges, for, minta 1,000 dapat 1,000 kind of ads, right? So there's like an informal economy of debt. Okay. So think about it as we look at these numbers are being told to us, A, is it a realistic or fair depiction of poverty? And B, what do these numbers do not account for? Right? Consumption, debt. And debt in a formal, informal sense. Right? This is not to mention, consumption, debt, most people struggle, even middle class people struggle with that, right? There's also a difference in assets, right, which poor people do not have. Right? So, more things to ponder about. Now let's put this in a more global perspective. Right? What if we were to use 50% of the median income household? Right? Malaysia, which wants to be a developed country, would have a poverty rate of 21%. Right? So most countries like the US, for example, its poverty line income is half of the median rate, right? Just make sure that you don't have too many people being left behind. Right? And Malaysia being so obsessed about being a high-income country, if that were the case, using high-income country measurements would have 21% of its population in poverty. Right? Way beyond the 3.8% of the official number given. So, put simply, the NEP has not helped. Right? The NEP has helped if you use their numbers. Right? Hardcore poverty is 761 to 800 ringgit. Hardcore poverty is 440 ringgit. Right? And there's about 30,000 families in hardcore poverty. That means they are within the bracket earnings of 440 ringgit a month. So when people in the government say we want to eradicate hardcore poverty, how impressive is that a feat if they put the standard so low, right? Especially when they're talking about all these mega projects, right? So where are our priorities? Second thing I want to mention, income inequality. Now this is a contentious issue, because a lot of people think that poverty is a problem. People are in agreement with that. But not everybody is convinced that income inequality is a problem. Maybe we can talk about that more. I have my reasons to think that it is, but some people, they say, well, so what, right? There will be rich and poor people. Okay, but we'll get to that maybe during the Q&A session. But just gathering the official numbers, what do we find? Top 20%, average monthly income, 10,208 ringgit a month. Bottom 40%, about 1,500 ringgit a month. Okay. Then you have the middle bracket, earning about 3,770. Right? You can see the jarring difference between the top 20% and the bottom 40%. Income share, top 20%, the latest numbers show have 51% of total income. Right? The bottom 40%, 2.6 million Malaysians can claim only 14.5% of the collective income that the nation produces. Right? The middle, in terms of income share at least, is still hanging in there. Right? 30% for the middle, 40%. So it is not as jarring as the top and bottom. Okay. In case you're wondering, this is information gathered from EPU and the Department of Statistics. Instead of looking at the top 20%, let's look at the top 10%. And what you have is even more worrying ratio, right? Top 10% can have access to 33.1% of the country's wealth. And the bottom 10%, only 2.0%. Gets more interesting. Alright, who are we talking about here? Okay, just to be clear, I didn't arrange this as neatly as I should have, but the numbers on the right, on your left-hand side, represents the percentage within the group, right? So when we a lot of the times we hear nowadays, people are saying, bottom 40% of Malaysians are earning 1,500 ringgit or less. Who are we referring to, right? 56% of Malays fall into that category, right? 25% Chinese, 43% of Indians. Orang asal the peninsula comprise 77% of those. And then orang asal, as well as East Malaysian, 63% of those. Right? So we're talking about a sizable amount of Malaysians who are being left behind based on the development policies that we have set so far. Right? And viewed from here, we have to really question the extent to which the tall buildings, the mega projects, the malls that are being increasingly built. I don't know if many malls, I haven't gotten a chance to look around, but in KL, there's a mall almost every 2 kilometers you go to, right? The two questions that raises: one, what is the priority when we think about development? Two, can these malls sustain themselves if many Malaysians are struggling to make decent income? Right. 62% of poor households headed by persons with primary education or less. And in this case, like I said, high income job opportunities will be completely out of reach. So bottom 40%, they attract multi-dimensional disadvantages. Low income means a lot of more things. It's not just not being able to afford more goods. It means low levels of education and skills, high level of unemployment, right? Poor nutrition and health, housing stress, homelessness, poor living conditions. And what this means is that poverty begets more poverty. Right? When your parents have to work more, they'll have less time for the children, right? Less attention. When they don't make enough, they can't buy nutritious food. So children are deprived of good health. When they're not educated, they don't know about their rights. They don't know about what kind of nutritional choices to make, right? Where to get help. So it is a cycle of problems that reinforces itself. And of course, when you have 40% of Malaysia, bottom 40% of income earning Malaysians earning less than 1,500, half of Malays falling into that category, it's easy to use the Chinese as a scapegoat, right? Because they're poor, they're vulnerable, they live in these conditions, easy to play the racial cards, right? So you don't have to look at systems, you don't have to look at policies. You can say, look, your life is so difficult, right? Vote for us, we'll protect you, but there's no really protection, right? So these are people who they pray there's a potential to exploit disadvantaged people because of their situation, their more precarious, fragile situation, to exploit using religion, using racial sentiments, rather than talking about concrete policies, right? So we talk about demonization of rempits a lot of times. We talk about social problems a lot of times, but we don't see the class element behind it, right? Think of the class of income earners who would be most proud of owning a motorcycle and parading the motorcycle around, right? Think of the income owners, class of income owners who, because of the stress in everyday life, would turn to drugs, right? Think of the class of income owners who live without the attention of their parents, turn out to vice and gangs, so on and so forth. I don't have much data to back this up, but it's not that difficult to draw the connection between the stress of earning very little and the many ways that people with little wealth do to feel recognized, to feel that they can belong in society. Right? So all these begets not only intergenerational deprivations, but also social issues. This tweet last month, I think there was a story of a woman, a girl, in fact, she's 22, she threw the baby outside of her apartment window. I think it was in PJ, right? So, a lot of uproar. Right? What have we come to society, as a society, where have we gone as a society where a mother can just throw away her child out of the balcony, right? So I was reading about this, it generated headlines for 2 or 3 days, and I learned a few things. One, she was a factory worker, right? Two, being a Malay woman, factory worker, and she lived in a kind of working class neighborhood of Egypt, right? So with all that stigma, first of all, you're a Malay Muslim woman, you're pregnant before marriage, right? Think of the pressure, the social pressure of that, right? Where are you going to show your face? In a country like this, that Dr. Farouk says, where it demonizes people for being different. Right? And then the second thing is you're earning so little. How can you support this child? Right? So in that circumstances of duress, of course you're going to do something crazy, right? When society has given you all these messages telling you that you do not belong, right? But what did the newspapers report anyway? The Malay newspapers say, inilah kurang agama, kurang dorongan ibu bapa, terpengaruh dengan budaya barat, so on and so on, but they don't talk about the fact that of the class aspect, right? If you cannot afford it, you're going to think 10 times of whether or not you want to raise a child. And it makes it worse when you're a Malay woman facing all the stigmas of having to behave a certain way, fulfill certain virtues. You have to abide by certain expectations of being a Muslimah. All that it would drive me crazy, right? So a lot of times when we talk about social issues, we don't see the class dimension. We just like to moralize, right? Talk about religion, talk about race, talk about budaya, so on and so forth, right? So the dimensions of inequality, dimensions of poverty runs deep than just how much you earn and how many things you can buy, right? So what is to be done? How much time? I think I'm close to the end of time, but I will try to summarize here. There's a Social Inclusion Act that's being called for by several members of civil society, IRF being one of the signatories. And essentially, what it's calling for is establishing an independent oversight body accountable to Parliament, ensure that members of Parliament take sole responsibility for implementing social inclusion programs, establish intervention units to oversee and implement the social inclusion programs at each parliamentary constituency, right? Basically, what it's asking for is for poverty issues to go from the bottom up, right? Rather than from all these divisions that are set by the government that are not aware of necessarily what's going on. Not only are they not aware, they are run mostly by corporate people, right? So Idris Jalla, for example, head of Mandu, corporate background, right? Corporate background is profits, profits, profits. I think we can talk about this more soon, but just want to show the current system, the way it's done now. So many people, there's so many measures are being done to deal with the poverty issue, right? So EPU has its own agenda, Ministry of Rural Development has its own agenda, Women and Family has its own agenda, the states have their own agenda. They have all these various measures, right? Like e-Kasih, my-Kasih, all these subsidies, so on and so forth. Who is monitoring them? Right? How do we know the money is being spent in the right way? Right? If you want to know, for example, one aspect of this, you have to go through the volumes of documents that they have, most of which are not accessible. Right? And if you cannot find it, you have to go to a different ministry, so on and so forth. Social Inclusion Act would simplify that by establishing a social intervention unit where all the measures and information will be centralized, and because it is subject to parliamentary oversight, if there are any issues of lack of transparency, of irregularities, it can be dealt with more openly, right? So that is sort of, we can talk about that more. I mean, there's a long and short of what I have to share right now about the current situation of the economically marginalized. So with that, I thank you, and I will hand the floor to Sarah.
Now, I was going to stick to the original plan, which is to have a 15-minute break. No? Shall we continue? Yes. Okay, we will continue and take our coffee at the end. So, thank you very much, Dr. Farouk and Fuad. And ladies and gentlemen, I hope, you've had a informative tour of the kind of issues that our country faces and the kind of future that we might have. Personally, I think we can have a bright future. But that requires us to work together. That requires us to look beyond the traditional, and I would say quite appalling reference points of race and religion. We've got to cut through all of that. So this is at a time when I think the kind of problems that Ford talks about, they are very real. I think in going forward with that, what we should not fall into is to fall into the politics of envy, of attacking rich people just because they're rich. Right? But at the same time, we cannot be complacent and just say, in a free market system, it's your ability. Right? If you work hard, you become rich. If you don't work hard, you're poor, so it's your problem. That's not reality. Poor people have fewer opportunities than we are, and they can tend to lock into a cycle. So those of us who are not in that dynamic in a direct sense at every level, we need to work together to make sure all of us have a place in the sun. So I think this is that moment in history, right? Even though I'm a believer in economic efficiency, I think we are at that moment in history where having the emphasis on solidarity is more important. Caring for one another is more important. That 56% of Malays have household income of 1,500 a month or less should matter to a Chinese. And so it should be, whether that person is an Indian or a Chinese or a Malay. So I invite you to ask the questions, which I'm sure many of you would have, and I'll let Dr. Farouk and Fuad to deal with most of them. I'll be happy to answer any questions too if you have any.